Wow. Oh, we're still recording? Was I? Or welcome back to A Better Choice Homestead. My name is Kelly, and on my channel I focus on food, growing it, preparing it, and preserving it. On Tuesdays, I do a cook with me video where I focus on quick, healthy, nutritious, and delicious meals that you can usually get onto the table in 30 minutes or less. This is kinda gonna be one of those meals. I'm actually gonna be making two things today, and the first thing is gonna take a couple of hours because it needs time to sit. This is something that you can make ahead of time, or prep ahead of time, I should say. But tonight I am gonna be making a curry chickpea with a Bhatura bread. Now, the Bhatura bread is not going to be traditional because that uses an Indian flour that is similar kinda to the American cake flour, but I'm actually going to be using some wheat berries and sifting that down into a finer flour and making it with that. And so I'm just going to call it balloon bread because this bread puffs up into an empty balloon shape that is so lovely, so delicious, and a really nice accompaniment to the curry dish. For the bread, I am going to be starting with 2 cups of Durham wheat berries. That was a happy accident. When I was playing around with this recipe, the recipe called for the Indian flour, which I'll post in the description, the full recipe, plus 2 tablespoons of semolina flour, which when you grind Durham wheat down, you get sort of semolina flour. So I had intended to grab out of my pantry the soft white wheat to use for the kind of cake flour. And I ended up grabbing the Durham wheat, and oh my goodness, it turned out amazing. So I'm just going to do it that way again. So I have the Wonder Mill, and I'm just going to pour my wheat berries in and get them grinded. That only takes less than a minute. I'm going to turn it on to get it started. You have to do that before you pour yours in. And 2 cups of whole wheat berries sifted down is going to result in 2 cups of finely milled flour. And now I'm going to get this sifted down because remember, we want a very fine cake-like flour for this recipe. So I have just this little flour sifting pan here that I got on Amazon. And what you're left with in here is wheat bran. If you have a use for that, I would love to know what you do with it because that is where a lot of the nutrients live, and we're sifting that out. What we're left with is a very, very fine, refined flour where, like I said, the bran and the germ have been removed. And over here we have the bran and the germ. This is much coarser, doesn't coat up on your hands the way that the flour does. To my bowl, I'm going to just make a well in the center. And I'm going to add my dry ingredients to the bottom. And that includes 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and 2 teaspoons of salt. I'm just going to mix those up a little bit here in the bottom of the bowl. And to that, I am going to add a 1/4 cup of Greek yogurt. And this is going to help kind of ferment this dough. To the bowl, we're going to add about a palmful of water at a time until we can get this mixed into a nice dough. So we're just mixing all of the salts, sugar, baking powder together, and then we're going to start pulling in the flour just by going in circles with our fingers. And when it gets too dry, so that it's not pulling any more in, we're going to add just another little palmful of water. You do want this to be a very hydrated dough, but you want to add the water slowly. And once we get this to kind of all come together, we're going to pour it out onto the surface, continue adding water and kneading for a few minutes until we get a really soft and supple dough. That yogurt is going to add a nice tang in here. All right, we're almost ready to pour it out of the bowl. We just want all of it to look like this. All right, I'm going to bring the dough together, flatten it out, and I'm going to make just some pockets in here with my fingers that I can pour or drizzle some more water down into. Remember, we want this to be hydrated. And then we're going to just knead that together. And right now, it feels really stiff, not soft, not pliable. I almost gave up on this when I was trying it the first time, but I kept with it and it turned out amazing. So delicious. How much water you'll add really depends on where you are, what your humidity is, what type of flour you're using or whole grain you're using. This is probably going to be really good with a soft white wheat berry as well. But as I mentioned, I tried it with the Durham wheat and absolutely loved it. Everybody loved it. We can come out of the bowl now, and I'm going to keep doing the same thing, just adding little bits of water into some pockets I'm just making with my fingers, and then kneading that back in. Little at a time, but even if you do add too much water, stick with it, just keep kneading it and it will come together, because that's what happened to me the first time I tried this. You don't want to use flour here on your surface. If anything, you can put a tiny bit of oil so that nothing sticks, but you don't want to add more flour. You want to get in as much water as you can. I started out with 2 cups. I've used about 1 so far. I can feel the dough starting to soften now. I'm still going to add a little more water. You just want to get that water worked in. This looks good. Now I'm going to put a little bit of oil on my hands, and I'm just going to run my hands over the dough ball just to make sure it doesn't dry out. We're going to let this sit now for 1 to 2 hours. So you can make this ahead of time, pop this into the refrigerator, pull it out maybe the next day, maybe make this on the weekend, because the next step with this is to actually fry the bread, which happens in seconds. So pull this out of the refrigerator when you start to make this curry dish. And by the time the curry is done, you can fry these up in a matter of seconds. I'm going to start by putting 2 little spice bowls together. So one is going to be used later and one is going to be used early on in the dish, but I'd like to get the spices put away so I have a full workspace to work with. So I'm going to start with the smaller dish, and in here we're going to add some garam masala seasoning. This is just a blend. It is a blend of cardamom, cinnamon, cloves, cumin, black pepper, and coriander. And for the garam masala, I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon. And then we're also going to want 1/2 teaspoon of salt. These will be added at the same time later on in the dish. I just think it's easier to have them all prepared and ready to go. I'm done with those. I'll get those put away. And next we have fennel seed, cumin, turmeric, coriander, Kashmiri chili powder, and some red pepper flakes. So I'm going to start with the chili powder, and I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of that. 2 teaspoons of the coriander powder. I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of turmeric. I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of cumin. 1 teaspoon of fennel seeds. and 1 teaspoon of red pepper flake. If you're not a fan of heat, you can dial that back or leave that out. It's a very pretty blend of spices. To the food processor, I am gonna add 1 medium onion. I'm just gonna cut the ends off, cut it into quarters, take the peel off, and throw the quarters into the food processor. I'm going to throw in 2 very large cloves of garlic. You can adjust that to your taste. We like garlic. I'm just going to cut this down a little bit because this is a very large clove. I have 2 serrano chili peppers here. I'm going to be throwing 1 of these in the food processor. I've got a very healthy thumb-sized piece of ginger. It's probably twice that, but I am going to be cutting off the edges that might be a little bit dry, and then just using a spoon to scrape down the outside and get the peel off. You can also cut down the sides if you'd like, but it's just as easy to scrape your spoon down the sides, and the paper coating comes off really easily. I'm just going to quarter this down and also throw that into the food processor. Now for the second serrano chili, I'm going to go ahead and just dice that up really quick since I have my knife out. So I'm going to cut it once the long way and then 3 times down each of those sides. I'm going to leave the seeds in mine because the seeds and the ribs are where most of the heat in a pepper lives, and we like heat. And then I'm just dicing this down. I'm just going to put that into a little bowl and set it aside. Now we're just going to run this until everything gets pasted together. I'm going to scrape down the sides once, because as you run your food processor, things kind of get pushed up a bit. So I want to make sure that the stuff that's up on top gets blended down as well. And run it for a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to set this aside for just a minute and we're going to get the tomatoes blitzed. So for the tomatoes, you want to use maybe a 14.5-ounce can of diced tomatoes, or you can use the equivalent of whole fresh tomatoes from your garden. I am going to use cherry tomatoes today because while we were waiting for the bread dough to rest, I popped outside and I still have a ton of cherry tomatoes out there. So I went ahead and picked a bunch, and I'm kind of winging it on the amount, but that's the fun of cooking in your own kitchen. A whole bunch of red, and then I also had these Saladette bumblebee tomatoes. I won't use those unless it doesn't look like I'm going to get enough. This is probably 3 cups of the red cherry tomatoes. I'll reserve these just in case. I think that looks like plenty. But if I need to blitz a few more, I've got these on standby. I'm gonna go ahead and get a Dutch oven heated up. You don't have to use a Dutch oven, but you definitely want to use something with a lid. And I like working with cast iron. I've got that heating up on a medium flame. And now I need to add some fat in the pan. A lot of the spices that we're working with are fat soluble, so cooking them in fat is really going to help draw out the flavor profiles, the aromas, even the nutrients that are in those spices. So we're going to use a fat. You can use an oil of your choice, coconut oil, avocado oil, or ghee. I have a lot of ghee preserved, and so that's what I'm going to use. This is ghee that I made in 2022. This is now 2024. So I had a whole lot of butter one year. I kept it in the freezer, and when I had my annual beef and pork order ready for pickup, I had to make room in my freezer. So I made a ton of ghee, and I still have quite a bit left. So I'm going to use 3 tablespoons of this right into the pan. And ghee is really just clarified butter. You cook butter down and it solidifies all the milk solids and removes them, which is how this becomes more shelf stable. And like I said, this is now 2 years old and perfectly fine. Ghee has like a richer, nuttier flavor than butter. I really like it. It's not a one-to-one replacement when you're baking, but when you're cooking, it's lovely. And now this will just stay on my counter. Honestly, that's where I keep the butter that I'm currently using until it's gone. And then I will open another one. And to this pan, I am going to add our blended mix of onion, garlic, ginger, and serrano pepper. And we're gonna cook that for 5 to 7 minutes. The ghee is totally melted down at this point. And this is gonna splatter a little bit, but I'll be careful. Oh, that is so fragrant. That smells amazing. All right, we're just gonna let this cook now for about 5 minutes, and I'm just gonna be stirring it occasionally to keep it from burning. We're at the 4-minute mark here. We're starting to get some caramelization on the bottom of the pan, which is good. This is not burning. I've stirred it, I think, 3 times, so about once per minute or so. I'm gonna let it go for up to 3 more minutes. So we're at least halfway there. We're starting to get some pretty good color on the bottom of this pan, which is excellent. What I'm really trying to do here is cook off a lot of the moisture in the paste that we made and develop some really nice flavor, which happens with this caramelization. Don't worry, we're gonna get all of this up when we add the tomatoes. But first, we're gonna caramelize the bottom of this pan even more by dumping in those dry spices that we pre-measured out. Good, we're at about the 6-minute mark here. I'm gonna go ahead and dump in our nice bowl of spices. And we're gonna cook those in here to wake them up with the heat. We're just gonna mix this around for a minute or 2. Oh, this smells incredible. That looks really good. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna pour in our pureed tomatoes. Get that stirred around. Now these tomatoes, because they were cherry tomatoes, they were not too watery, which is good, but there's enough water in here to cook the dish. You can always add water if it's too thick, or cook it a little bit longer if it's too wet. All right, with the tomatoes nicely blended in there, I'm gonna add 2 cans of chickpeas or garbanzo beans. You can certainly use dry garbanzo beans for this. That was my original intention, but I'm trying to make this a quick meal. And if you're gonna use dry beans, you're gonna need to soak them overnight. And then what I would do is pressure cook them on high for 35 minutes and do a full natural release. So this is the quick way of doing it. And garbanzo beans or chickpeas, they are a really good plant-based protein. They are loaded with fiber, with B vitamins, with magnesium, potassium, and zinc. So they're really good for heart health, digestive health, weight management, and blood sugar control. So this is an excellent food for your diet and your overall health. All right, now that we have the chickpeas in here, I am gonna go ahead and add half of the reserved diced up serrano pepper, just half. And we're gonna get those cooked in here. And I'm going to throw in 1 cinnamon stick as well, just for an added boost of that really spicy flavor. And I'm just going to leave that cinnamon stick in there until we're finishing the dish, and then I will pull that back out. All right, that's a good boil right there. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn this down to simmer. I'm going to cover this, and we're going to let this cook for about 10 up to 15 minutes, depending on the consistency that we want. Put the lid on and just lower the heat so that it simmers. 10 to 15 minutes. All right, I went ahead and moved that cast iron Dutch oven to the other burner, so this one is closer to me and I can work with this. And now we're gonna get to making some dough balls. Here is that dough we made, that beautiful dough. Now I'm not gonna make too many of these dough balls because really 1 is enough per serving. So I'm just gonna get a little oil on my hand. And I'm gonna pinch off pieces of the dough ball, maybe a little less than golf ball size, and I'm going to do 1 at a time. The oil is to help you roll this out without it sticking to your rolling pin or the work surface, but I have put down a silicone mat here. When you roll these out, you want to make sure that you don't have any cracks in your dough, because that will prevent this from ballooning up the way we want it to. So I've just taken the dough ball and I have flattened it out in my hand, and now I'm just going to roll it out as large as I can get it without going too thin. So you want to get it pretty thin, like a tortilla. This is a really soft and supple dough, so easy to roll out. And again, you just want to make sure that you don't have any cracks in it. I've got the oil here heating up. But before we put this in, we want that oil to be screaming hot. Our oil is at about 355 degrees now, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in. This is how thin the dough is, and I am just going to carefully drop it in. And it's going to immediately puff up, and this cooks quick. I'm going to flip it onto the other side and transfer that to a paper towel lined plate or bowl. I don't think the oil was hot enough because we didn't get a good enough puff. Let's check on our dish. Oh, it smells so good. This is looking amazing. All right, I'm gonna go ahead now and add in that garam masala and salt. I'm gonna mix that in well. Get that all blended in there. When you're using the garam masala, it's really a finishing spice. So we are almost done with this dish. We're gonna let this cook for maybe 5 more minutes. Oh, it smells so good. All right, I just checked the oil temp. It's a little over 400 degrees. So I went ahead and dialed back the heat just a little bit. But here's our pancake, our dough ball flattened out. Doesn't have to be in a perfect circle at all. And I'm just gonna carefully drop it in and then get my utensil ready, because this is gonna puff up and be amazing. You see those puffs? This does not take long to cook, so I'm going to go ahead and just flip that. There's nice golden color on there. And immediately I am just going to transfer that right over to a paper towel lined plate. And we're going to set that aside. And we're going to roll out another one. Look at the puff on that one. It's perfect. Flip it over. Encourage it to brown up a little bit on the puffy side by holding up the edges, and we're done. It's beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the heat. We're ready to finish the pot and to serve. All right, let's fish out that cinnamon stick. He's done his job. And I'm going to add back in that half of a diced serrano pepper. Again, don't if you don't like this with heat. And I also have a little bunch of cilantro chopped up that I'm going to add as a garnish. I know half the world hates cilantro and the other half loves it. If you're one that loves it, go ahead and add it. If you're one that hates it, just leave it out, or you can substitute with flat leaf parsley. We're just going to get this mixed through. This smells divine. Truly, this mix of spices is candy to your nose. It smells amazing. Really nice vegetarian dish here. Beautiful flavors, really high protein, really high fiber. You've got most of your B vitamins in here. Just the perfect dish. Let's get this plated up. Can't wait to try this. Nice hearty serving. And look at this beautiful Bhatura bread, but I call it balloon bread because it puffs up like a balloon, and I'm using different ingredients, so I think I get to call it whatever I want. All right, let's do a taste test. One more thing. When I fried the first piece, the oil wasn't hot enough. It is still going to be absolutely delicious, but all we got were these little tiny puffs. We didn't get the big puff. And the puffs will last for probably 20 minutes, and then they'll slowly start to deflate. So these are best done as you're finishing this dish or whatever dish you're going to be serving this with, so you can get these to the table while they're hot. All right, let's do a taste test. I'm going to take some of that balloon bread and just rip it. And then I'm going to use this to serve this. It smells so good. That is an explosion of flavor in your mouth. Let's try that bread. I know it's good, but let's try it anyway. The bread is very soft. We had a nice puff going on here, so we've got like kind of an empty pocket here to kind of put some of your curry in there. I've got it kind of sandwiched in here right now, though. Wow. Those flavors married together are absolutely incredible. Now, this does have heat to it. So if you're not a big heat fan, you know I am. If you're not a big heat fan, dial back the heat by leaving out the red pepper flakes or leaving out at least one, if not both, of the serrano chilies, because there is quite a bit of heat. Although it's heat that's just at the back of your tongue. It's not down my throat. It's not burning my mouth. It's a very subtle heat, but it is there. These flavor profiles mixed together are insanely good. You know what this reminds me of? Well, you wouldn't know, but I'll tell you. I grew up in Northern California, which was actually central in the Bay Area. I spent the first 32 years of my life there, and I think I got spoiled because it was such a melting pot of different ethnicities. We had the most phenomenal restaurants anywhere you went. And then I moved to central New York. And don't get me wrong, we have our regional food and it's good. We have a lot of Italian food mostly. We have some Mexican restaurants. We have some Asian restaurants, but it's not the stuff that I'm familiar with on the West Coast. But you know what? I just replicated some of that in my kitchen. I am not kidding you. This is absolutely delicious. Beautiful vegetarian dish, loaded with protein, super easy to make. So that was under 30 minutes, plus a little bit of extra prep time to get that dough ready, but you can certainly do that ahead of time. I'm actually gonna save the rest of that dough ball, put it in the fridge, and I'll roll it out tomorrow for leftovers with this dish. Thank you so much for joining me here at A Better Choice Homestead. My name is Kelly, and I do hope you come back and visit again soon.